Hey, sir. So good afternoon again. So thank you po again for gracing our interview for Kwentuhan sa Diliman. So essentially po, I'll be asking questions about your uh, background, the personal background, at the same time as your stint in the department and your educational and research background as well.
Right,
So
right.
let's start off with your personal background.
Mm,
So
okay.
pwede nyo pong ibahagi sa ating makikinig about kung kailan po kayo pinanak, okay lang,
Mm.
and saan po kayo pinanak, and about your family as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, my full name is Ricardo Trota Jose, and I was born October 29, 1957. So 60, I just turned 63 last month. And pinanganak ako dito sa Quezon City. The clinic is still there. It's the Delgado Clinic. At that time, that was the major clinic sa Quezon City. So halos lahat ng tao na may kaya or whatever who were somebody, doon pinanganak. Like all of my siblings were born there. Dr. Delgado was a very famous physician at the time, a child physician. And taga Quezon City talaga ako. I was born in Cubao. Or the Delgado Clinic is in Kamuning, but I was born in I was raised in Cubao all throughout. We were there when I was growing up. It was really hindi pa masyadong ayos yung Cubao. The streets in our area were still dirt roads. So nakita namin yung growth of Cubao as a commercial center. Nandun na yung Araneta Coliseum, yung mga shops sa Aurora Boulevard, but we saw the development of that, yung growth of Cubao. My father was a professor at the College of Music. He was teaching piano and orchestra conducting. He was a professional pianist, concert pianist, and conductor. And my mother was his former student. They met at Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost at that time, college. She was his student in piano and voice, and kinasal sila. So I'm the second of 6 children. And so more or less when we grew up, we bahagi na kami ng UP, no? Because my father was in UP teaching, and I took my elementary school starting from kindergarten in UP Elementary School, and moved out of UP during high school because I went to Philippine Science High School 4 years. And then balik na naman sa UP for my 4-year college degree. Since I came from Philippine Science High School, we were more or less pressured to take science subjects. And at that time, wala pa yung payback contract. No? Ngayon, if you take a non-science subject, babayaran mo ang science high to get out of it. No? At that time, wala pa kami. No? So I took up physics because I thought that was the most closely related subject to my interest. Already, as early as elementary school, I was interested in history already, particularly World War II history and the Japanese occupation. So, in high school, yun ang interest ko rin. But, syempre, when I went to college, you had to choose a science subject. So, physics seemed to me the closest to history because it explains why things happened. And para sa akin, well, yung physics kasi is also the development of the atomic bomb and dropping of the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. So, there is a link there. Pero yung method of teaching sa Science High kasi was very broad. It was very multidisciplinary. And yung physics teacher namin, magaling talaga siya. No? He was able to link physics with literature, with philosophy, with math, and everything. Pagdating ko sa UP, it was very different. Talagang very rigid na, puro math na. And there's no link anymore. And so I spent more of my time in the library instead of in the lab, doing experiments and computing. I was reading books on history, which was really my love at that time. So eventually, after 2.5 years, sabi ko, I have to shift out of this because talagang hindi ko na kaya yung physics and the mathematical demands. My heart was really in history already. even in elementary school. So I shifted, and yung okay naman, supportive naman yung parents ko. The main question was, paano ka mabubuhay? What job will you have? And sabi ko, I can probably wind up teaching and writing. And so sabi ko, sige, bahala. We will support you as best we can, but you have to make your own choice. So I finished history after more or less 2 years. And then I applied for the department and immediately was taken by the department. And so I started in 1979. And tuloy-tuloy na yun. Except for brief trips abroad, I was out for 1 year in Okinawa in 1986. And then I was in Japan for a research fellowship, 88 to 1990. And then I was in Japan again for my PhD, 1993 to 1995. So bakit Japan yung hilig ko? It's because when I was growing up in the 1960s, siyempre, very current pa rin yung World War II. Most of the boys in my generation were really interested in World War II. Alam naman yung mga aeroplano, yung mga vapor and weapons. But most of World War II was Germany, Europe, yung Bismarck, Battle of the Atlantic, Battle of Britain. And even at a young age, I was interested in that in elementary, and even kindergarten. I think yung binigay ng yung kindergarten teacher ko as a gift for finishing kindergarten was a model plane. It was a German plane. It was an MA-109, and I loved it. So it talagang that built up the interest. And then I was given a book on transportation, which had things on ships and others. So nandun yung interest ko talaga ever since. And then I was in grade 3 or 4. My interests at that time were building plastic models, and basically those that were used in World War II and those that were used here. And one of my uncles, who well, the only brother of my mother, he was practicing medicine in the States, but he would come back mga once a year. And every time he came back, magkakwento siya tungkol sa Japanese occupation. My mother was in Zamboanga City at the time. So every time he would come back, yung kwento niya palagi is the Japanese were different. And the Japanese, he made friends. He was able to speak Japanese. He learned Japanese. Naging very close sila sa Japanese. And sabi ko, it's so different from my father. My father would talk about the Japanese occupation in World War II, pero mababagsik ang mga Hapon. The Japanese were cruel. And only later did I find out that the Japanese executed my grandfather, my father's father. But when I would listen to my uncle talk about the war, iba, it was very different perspective. So sabi ko, bakit ganito? And so that really developed my interest. And at that time, siguro, it was grade 5, grade 6. Aside from building models, I was also reading books. So yung mga gifts na binibigay sa akin ng mga kapatid ko were books on World War II, basically. So I was reading those. And by the time I was grade 6, since I was studying in UP, nandun yung UP bookstore. It was in Vinson's Hall. And they had some good books on the war, mga pocket books. And I would buy some of them with my allowance. So one of the ones that really made me so interested was a book by John Toland. He was not a historian in the true sense of a historian. He was more of a writer. He was a popular historian, not a scholarly one. But he wrote a book called But Not in Shame. And that book, But Not in Shame, showed the war, the first 6 months of the war in the Pacific, from 3 sides: the American side, the Japanese side, and the Philippine side. So doon talaga, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to look at the war from all sides. He married a Japanese, so he was able to interview Japanese. So that thing that really inspired me to do the same thing. Now, years later, I actually got to meet John Toland. He visited here at one time, partly because I helped the U.S. Embassy invite him, or I suggested that he be invited. So he came. So napa-autograph ko yung mga books niya. So I was really after But Not in Shame. But Not in Shame was written 1961. he wrote another book called The Rising Sun, which came out in 1970, which was even more interesting to me because that was really more from the Japanese side, the whole Pacific War from the beginning till the end. And talagang yung ginagamit ng methodology, aside from books and printed material, was interviews. And sabi ko, I want to do exactly the same thing. I want to interview people. I want to go into documentary material. I want to see the war from all sides. So, ayan, plus the fact that my brothers were giving me books on the war, and then yung uncle nga in the States gave me a Christmas gift once, a 14-volume set of World War II history. So talagang binasa ko yun, no, from cover to cover. It was so interesting. So by the time I was in high school, nandun na rin yung interest ko. And it got to the point that even before I graduated from high school, I was really reading very serious material already. And my uncle had made friends with some Japanese uh, veterans of the war. Mga, uh, these are Navy officers. And so I asked him, can I get in touch with them? So by fourth year high school, sumulat na ako sa doon sa isang, really, and I found out much later, he was a very well-respected Japanese naval historian. And he was a veteran of the war. So sumagot siya, no? So I was so interested in that. So that built up my interest. And when I went to college, uh, even before I shifted to history, I went to the Ayala Museum because some friends had already gone there and made contact with some people there. So I went there and asked them to look at their pictures, and they showed me their pictures. And they said, if you can help us identify what pictures these are, kasi walang caption yung marami doon. Sabi, ay tiningnan ko, and I said, I know some of these pictures. I can tell you what they are. So this is still third year, fourth year college. So I said, if you can identify them for us, we can give you copies. So then I would bring my own books there. They would copy the pictures there, and that increased their collection, and they gave me pictures naman also. So that really was a part of all of this building up. So even before I graduated, I was, sabi ko, what John Toland had done in the 60s was to interview survivors of the war. And so I began, sabi ko, who will I interview first? And I interviewed my uncle about his experiences. Siyempre, very crude pa yung gamit noon. It's the cassette recorder. And then I interviewed my father, and I got some of their stories down on tape. I transcribed them myself when I could. And then one interview led to another. And so this is even before I graduated. So I was already interviewing people. So when I graduated and I started teaching in UP, of course, I attended graduate classes. And some of the faculty members who inspired me very much were, one of them would be Doctor. He was not doctor yet at the time, Isagani Medina. And Isagani Medina was really a major resource in the department kasi nagtrabaho siya sa library, National Library. His real background was first library science, and then he shifted to history. So alam na alam niya yung mga rare materials in the UP archives, in the National Library. And his whole room was really a library, an archives, and kung ano-ano. It was really filled with everything that you can think of. And so, again, I had not yet graduated from the BA. I was already hanging around the FC. And I would just drop by his room and we would chat. And he would reminisce about the war. And then by this time, I had gotten music from the war. I asked my mother to play some of them on the piano, and then I played some of it for him and said, I remember that. So by that time, I had learned the lyrics also. So kumakanta kami. We would go to the canteen of the faculty center, and then we would sing the same Japanese songs together. So he was one who really inspired me. And sabi niya, don't work on the Pacific War kasi my real interest was Pacific War in general. And then sabi niya, you focus on the Philippines. Wala pang gumagawa ng history ng Philippines during the war. So he was the reason why I really shifted and really became specialist in the Philippines. And then another one who inspired me very much was Dr. Salamanca, Bonifacio Salamanca, whose specialization naman was diplomatic history. So he was the only one really into diplomatic history. And again, when you do World War II, you have to deal with diplomacy. You go into why the war started, U.S.-Japanese relations. So I could relate to that very well. I enjoyed his class very much. Talagang treaties and diplomatic history, East Asian diplomatic history. So that was one class I really enjoyed. So these two were among the teachers who really inspired me very much. No, they helped me move in the direction I eventually wound up in. So when I first started teaching, ako yung pinakabata sa department, and it felt rather strange na ako yung pinakabata, but I was really very at ease with adults because I had been dealing with veterans. About this veterans thing, so aside from interviewing family and relatives of friends, sabi ko, no one has really done anything on Bataan. So one day I just went out to Fort McKinley, Fort Bonifacio, where they had this uh, headquarters of the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor. And I went there and wala akong kilala. No? I didn't know anybody, but I said, I want to meet people who fought in Bataan and Corregidor. And when I went there, wala sila, only the secretary was there, but he gave me some material and gave me some telephone numbers to call. And so I called them up and eventually interviewed a lot of them, and they became my very close friends. So they were all the way from generals, retired generals, to privates, to whatever. I would attend their reunions, and it was really, I became part of them. So in a sense, I was the youngest member of the faculty, but I didn't think that way anymore because talagang parang yung barkada ko were all these old people already, you know, who had served in World War II and the Korean War and others. So there was another thing that also happened just at about the time that I was almost graduating, which again helped me further develop my interest. The president of the Philippines at that time, President Marcos, had declared, I think this was 1976 or 1977, he declared that as a year of the reunion for peace. And he said, we will invite veterans from all countries that served in World War II. They will all come here, renew your ties. And so they began to come in. And what was so intriguing for me was especially the Japanese began to come. So sabi ko, I want to get in touch with them. Instead of going to Japan muna, let's get in touch with them. So how did I get in touch with them? Through the Department of Tourism. Again, wala akong kilala. I go in there. How do I get in touch with these? They told me some of the schedules, and naka-postulate ako doon sa group nila. So I was, on one side, I was talking with these Japanese in the hotels, and the Americans were coming in also. So I was talking to the Americans in the hotels. And so it was a strange thing na, again, wala akong kilala, but I would hang out in the lobby of Manila Hotel or Bayview Hotel waiting for them to come. And then when they start to come after their tour, I would say, can I interview you? And surprisingly, many of them agreed to be interviewed. And I got their addresses, and we continued to remain in contact even after they went back to the States or to Japan. And there were Australians who came in also, and there were others who came in. And then, of course, the Filipinos. So I think that reunion for peace started in 1977, but it continued for 2 or 3 more years. And so talagang dun nahasa yung main interests ko in trying to talk with them. And it really further inspired me to go to Japan and study Japanese and learn the Japanese side of the story. And then there was another person who was also very important in developing these interests. There was a man in Angeles in Pampanga by the name of Daniel Dizon. And he later became controversial because he was supporting this kamikaze memorial in Mabalacat. But at the time I met him, he was head of what was known as the Kamikaze Memorial Society. And I again, wala akong I knew my friends in the Ayala Museum just gave me his address. They said, we visited him. You go there, introduce yourself. So I went there one early morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, yata, first time to go out of Manila on my own, take the bus out. And when I got to his house, talagang what, 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m. Sabi niya, there's a group of kamikaze survivors who's coming and their families. And sabi ko, yes, that's why I came. And so, sabi niya, you want to come along? Sige. So I went with him, and that developed a lifelong friendship. He passed away 3 years ago. I went to the funeral. I saw him just before he passed away. So these were among the people who really helped develop that interest. So then I did get to meet Japanese academics here, and they said, you better study in Japan, you better take your PhD there. So that's why I studied in Okinawa for 1 year to get the language, get the hang of the language. My first trip to Japan was 85, where there was this friendship program for Asia, Southeast Asia. Young people from Southeast Asia would be invited to Japan on a 1 month tour of Japan, meet Japanese students and so forth. And so I went on that tour. I was chosen for one month in 1985. I developed many friends at that time. I met members of the academe. I went outside the itinerary of the group, and so lahat ng free days ko napuno. No? I would come back to the hotel after meeting someone from Kyoto University or meeting from someone in Tokyo University. And none of the others could understand how I got those contacts. Sabi ko, tagal na ito. And so eventually, yes, I got a scholarship for Okinawa for 1 year. And that's where I learned my Japanese. And then from there, 2 years later, I went to Tokyo University as a research student. Doon mas nahasa yung Japanese ko. And I began working on Japanese materials. And then in 93, I was invited to get my PhD in Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And they said, kayang-kaya mo yan. My advisor said, you can do it. You have already published. You have a track record. You can do this. You can finish it in 2 years. Now, in Japan, to do your PhD in 2 years was almost impossible for anyone else. Yung iba, 8 years, 9 years, yung iba talagang hindi natatapos. I've known people who were there longer. But my advisor insisted, you finish in 2 years because after that, I might become university president and I will not have time for you anymore. So kailangan, you have to finish. So I finished in 2 years. And I think that was the shortest. I was the first one to finish in that program in Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And then bumalik ako sa department with my PhD and continued to publish. And so from then on, it really was going up and up and up. And yeah, so I think that summarizes my career.
Okay. Yeah, very ano nga sir, very colorful and productive comparative. And at this point po, we would like to ask your publication since maganda
Yes.
yung build up po talaga ninyo in history and yung interest nyo with military and World War II in
Yes.
general.
Yes. So actually, when it came time to choose my thesis in the MA, sabi ko, I have so much material already. I can write on a lot of things. But sabi ko, let me start from the beginning. So sabi ko, let me, instead of going into the Japanese occupation itself, let me go before what was going on before. So that became my MA thesis. That was on the Philippine Army, 1935 to 1942. And when I wrote it as a thesis, syempre pumasa ako kagad. In fact, it was twice that long. I really wanted to go from 1901 to 1942. Sabi ng advisor ko, si Dr. Salamanca, cut that in two. You cannot do that. It's too long. Two volumes ngayong sinabit ko sa kanya. Sabi ko, forget about the first volume. You focus only on 1935 to 42. And so, when I graduated, I was already married by that time. And my wife was teaching at Ateneo de Manila University. She was in the Japanese Studies program. She had her dissertation published by Ateneo de Manila University Press. That became Japan Views the Philippines. That was her dissertation in Tokyo. And they said, you submit your MA thesis then. Ateneo can publish it also. And so that became my first book. And in fact, her book and my books were published together. It was the first time that they ever had a husband and wife team published at the same time. So yung book launching was really very significant because it was the first time they had a husband and wife team. And I made sure that I invited several of the veterans who I interviewed for the book. And I was so proud that they came, mga retired generals and others, and they came and they attended the book launching. So that was my first major book, ito, no? Philippine Army, 1935 to 1942. So when I look at this now, so because there's so much I want to change in it, there's so much that I've learned since, but I haven't had the time to update it. And then that was my first major book, but there were many articles I had published before that. Among the articles were the Philippine National Guard in World War One, because no one had done anything on the Philippines in World War One, and I actually met a veteran who did not go to France, but he was in the National Guard when I was in Surigao, and I interviewed him, and he was 100 years old, and so I got some interesting stories. So, yun, that was published in Philippine Studies, 1988 or something. And I also published other articles on the war. The Tribune was a term paper in one of my classes in the graduate school. I interviewed a number of former journalists who worked with the Tribune during the Japanese occupation. And Philippine Studies decided to publish it. Sabi nila, it's too long. We cannot publish it in one article. So hinati nila into two. It was published in two installments. And you can access them for free, Philippine Studies. And aside from that, the other major contribution I am proud of is the joint collaborative work that I had with my own advisor and several of my Japanese friends in the academe in Japan, when we worked together on a project on looking at the Japanese occupation of the Philippines through primary sources in the Philippines, in the United States, and in Japan. So I was the only Filipino in that group, and this was 1991, early 90s, no, and up until 95, 96. And so the end result of this was a number of interviews that were done in Japan that I participated in also, which were published in Japan. They transcribed the interviews and published those. Unfortunately, there's no English translation. And then all of us members of the team, my former advisor, friends in Sophia University in Kyoto and others, they all wrote a particular piece. And I wrote a piece also which was based on my doctoral dissertation. And that was published in Japanese. And sabi nila, we have to publish this in English. No? We have to let the larger world see what our research is all about. And so I was the co-editor in the English translation. So fortunately, most of the faculty members with me were good in English also. So all I did was brush up their translations and double check the names and other things. And so that turned out to be the joint editorial publication that is this, no? The Philippines Under Japan, which I am co-editor of. And I'm very proud of this because it's the first time really that you have a Japanese-Philippine team working together and using materials from the Philippines, the United States, Japan, Australia. And I was the main contact in the Philippines. So I think those are my two major works plus the articles I had in Philippine Studies and several other articles and book chapters that came out later.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, in 2003 po, you
Hmm.
started your stint or
Yes,
to be the department chair of the Department of History. So can you
yes.
tell us some about your experiences during your
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I didn't want to become department chair. No, there's always a problem. Sabi nga nila, if you want to do research, stay away from administration. And I succeeded in staying away from administration for a long time. It's really just teaching, faculty member. But eventually, in fact, I was already scheduled to become chair as early as 2000 or 2001. I don't remember. But my wife was on sabbatical that year, 2001, and she was going to be on leave from Ateneo, and she got a 1 year grant to do research in Japan. So I joined her in that trip, and so I was able to postpone becoming chair. So pagbalik ko, he said, there's no excuse anymore. You have to become chair. You really have to become chair. And at that time, medyo magulo yung department because there were two major factions, and within the other faction there are sub factions also. So the idea was that each faction would have its own turn as chair. And in fact, at that time, most of the time I was in the faculty up to 2003. I could see that it was really always a problem yung selection of the next chair. It got so bad actually that one proposal was that everybody would have his or her turn as chair, and that they would give a sequence. So this year, so and so, and next chair ito number two. So may sequence na established, but it didn't work out that well. You cannot really foresee what will happen in the future. But because of the factions at that time, the previous chairs basically came from one faction. I tried to stay away from the factions, trying to be more active in research. But syempre, I was more or less identified with one faction. And so, let me see, it was Dr. Kamagay. And then after Dr. Kamagay, it was Dr. Miranda. And so the other faction would say, kami naman, it's our turn. So they were trying to put their own person there. And ako, I was abroad most of the time. So sabi ko, I'll get out of this. But when I came back, they said, you run as chair. And so I did run as chair, and nandun nga yung factionalism, and medyo galit nga yung other side because they said, kayo na naman. And uh, so the kind of agreement was, okay, I think the person who was being groomed by the other side, wala pa siyang PhD. They accepted, you are going to be the chair, but the next chair, dapat sa side namin. No? So I entered the department chairmanship under those conditions, that the department was factionalized. If you look at the historical associations today, you can see how factionalized history still is. And at that time, grabe talaga. It went to the point that under Dr. Miranda and Dr. Kamagay, it got so bad even that it was so difficult to get a quorum kasi ayaw mag-attend yung isang faction. And at one point, I think it was with Dr. Kamagay, she could not maintain order. She had to invite the dean of CSSP to preside over the meeting kasi parang hindi siya pinakikinggan. So it had gotten to that it was really so serious. It was very grabe talaga yung condition. So when I came in, it was really trying to talk to both sides. So, of course, I was identified with one side. I was closer to one side. But I was trying to reach out to the others. So every time a faculty meeting was called, talagang you have to hold your breath. Dadating ba yung, will we have a quorum? Yun yung problema. Kasi if you don't have a quorum, the other side will easily say, oh, bakit ka nag-meeting? Walang quorum. So that was the main problem I think I had to face. And I would always talk to both sides. So I guess the highlight of my term was that I was able to bring both sides together. And when I left the chairmanship and when Dr. Llanes succeeded me, buo na yung department. So people were talking to each other again, and we were now working as a department. There was also one thing that had happened before I became chair, was that the department was chosen as a center of excellence by CHED. And so there was a lot of money that came to the department for that. And under the terms of the Center for Excellence, the department was supposed to hold meetings, conferences, uh, symposia addressed to teachers. How public school teachers and other history teachers could improve their skills and be exposed to the state of the art through the department. Just to show how factionalized the department was, we could not hold one conference by the department. It had to be a conference by the PHA group, the Philippine Historical Association group, one conference by the uh, what is the Philippine National Historical Society of the Philippines, and the other one was Adhika naman. So we wound up having three very separate conferences in different parts of the Philippines, Cabanatuan, Batangas, Cavite, which was good. I mean, insofar as reaching out, it was supposed to be outside the outside Luzon or outside Manila, ideally. So reach out talaga. But the irony was na we couldn't hold it as one department. It was really three groups, and the aim of that was for the proceedings of each of those conferences to be published. And it was during my term that we tried to publish it, but one group didn't want to submit. Parang jealous yata sila, or I don't know. They always delayed in submitting the proceedings. So handa na kami to publish the two of them. But naubusan kami ng oras, so I wasn't able to publish them. But that was really a sticking point at that time, even though the department was now moving as one already. But it was difficult to maneuver. One other thing that I did, uh, I think was I was able to work out a update on the syllabus of the BA history program. It was not a very major change, no, but it just updated it so that we could say, ayan, mas bago ito, mas contemporary. It reflects more the current state of historical writing. So we were able to push that through. And then if you know how to change the syllabus of a particular course, grabe yung procedures dyan. So you really have to start with the faculty, then you go to the college, then you go to the group, the specific academic group within UP Diliman. Then you have to go. It's really a whole complex system. And doon ko talaga nakita na grabe. It's so difficult to change even one requirement in a syllabus. No? Grabe yung bureaucratic tactic, procedure to get that thing changed. But nabago naman namin. No? So we were able to do that. And what else were we able to do? Yun nga, I think the main thing was that people were talking to each other when we held Christmas parties or nag-attend na from all sides. I would get them all together. And so when my term ended in 2006, it was a very peaceful transition. There was no more wala nang away-away. It was really, well, we were decided that Dr. Llanes would be the one to follow me. So it was really a very orderly transition. In fact, we had a very nice ceremony, very friendly ceremony. Again, everybody attended that. And I was presented with a key to the department and some other things. So, I think that was my major contribution, that it stabilized the department. It made the department one again.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just to follow up lang po, do
Yeah,
you have
sure.
a personal, do you call this, view or parang how do you manage the administration or the department? Like, do you have a principle or a philosophy whenever you handle nga these types of
Mm.
issues?
Mm-mm. Yeah, well, I tried to make it a point not to side with anybody actually. So, okay, nandun yung mga adhika, nandun yung PHA, yung NHC, National Historical Society, PNHS. No? So I tried to deal with all of them together. And so I would not, I would, in fact, I tried to attend all of their conferences. So I tried to be a member of all of them so that they could see na I was not taking sides. Kasi yung isang major problem was if you were really identified with a particular group, they could say, your favoritism, mas binibigyan mo sila ng importansya. So I made it a point to really show them that I was not taking sides. I was talking to everybody. I was attending all of their conferences, or I tried to attend all of their conferences. And if I had to give as chair, kasi the one thing you usually have to do is give an opening statement or an opening address at the particular conference, and usually I would be invited to all of them. So I think that was my main principle, that I would not deliberately favor one group or the other. I would treat them all equally. And I think the fact that my own track record at that point already was already, well, they could not contest it. No? That may publications ako, I was respected internationally and nationally, so they could not challenge that. So in a sense, that also brought more recognition to the department, I think, because of my own position. I was already recognized both locally and abroad. So that that made the department a little more visible.
Okay, sir.
Mm.
And then sir, I've read kasi from the department that it was during your term na yung first
Mm.
Spanish Friendship Day conference was first
Ah,
held.
yeah.
So how was it,
Mm-mm.
sir?
Yeah. That was hard kasi we had to organize that. It was in Baler. I think now we hold it in UP na, no? But the first one was in Baler kasi si Senator Angara nga yung nag-ano niya, he's from Baler. So that was a very difficult thing to organize kasi we had to work with the Spanish embassy, we had to work with the Department of European Languages, and again, in a sense, it was easier for me to do that because of my exposure to diplomatic history. And I suppose in my time in UP, I did not remain with the department alone. No? I had friends everywhere. So I had friends in the physics department. I knew people in chemistry. I taught, hindi ko na kwento, but I taught journalism for several years. No? I taught history of journalism. I was kind of the standard professor of history of journalism for quite a long time. So marami akong kilala sa masscom. And of course, my father was teaching in music before he retired. So marami akong kilala din doon. So that was an advantage, I think. So when you are supposed to pull up a conference like this, siyempre marami akong kilala din sa NHCP, National Historical Institute at that time. So it was difficult to manage, but I knew people from these different organizations. So it was relatively easier to mobilize them. And the difficult one, of course, was going to Baler itself, because that was a very, very long trip to Baler. Then you have to stay there 2 or 3 nights because sa pagod, no? Going there is such a difficult thing. So yeah, I guess the other thing was in doing my PhD in Japan, I met not only Japanese, but I also met Spaniards. Si Florentino Rodao, nakilala ko doon. So it was something that really opened avenues, no? And I did a lot of research in the States. I even went to Britain and Germany, and I had my contacts there. So I think all of that was advantageous in trying to put up, since this was an international conference, then it was, all that experience was uh, very helpful. Being able to work with other departments within UP, and being able to work with embassies, that was all of that was a great advantage to that.
Sir. So, sir, for actually, this is the last part of the
Mm-mm,
interview. So, we would like to know your personal thoughts or views regarding the state of our Department of History in UP
mm-mm.
and yung discipline po ng history in our country, in the Philippines.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to see that the department is in good condition. We have a lot of young members. And during my time when I was young, karamihan were really quite old. No? They belong to the elderly generation. And for a long time, I was the youngest in the department talaga. And so it's comes as a strange feeling that now I'm one of the oldest in the department. But for a long time, kasi the one problem that the department had when I was still in the early years was parang ayaw nilang tumanggap ng new blood. I think they would feel threatened by younger people coming in. When I was still relatively young in the department, they took in Ray Ileto, but nagkabanggaan, no? And Ray Ileto was not renewed. And we also had, for a while, Ambeth Ocampo was also teaching in the department. We were roommates, actually, in the faculty center, but hindi rin siya tumagal sa department. So there was kind of this, for a while, even my own position was in danger for a while because I spent so much time interviewing people and doing research and writing outside UP that nabinbin yung graduate studies ko. So they said, you better finish or else you won't be renewed. And so for one semester yata hindi ako na-renew, and there were these difficulties. But that's why parang, when you look at the department now, there are so many young faces in it. So it's a young department. And that's nice to see because it's vigorous. It is also, it's able to link up with the younger students now because mas familiar kayo dun sa technology today. And so it's nice to see that going on, and that everybody is interested in history and has his or her own particular fields. They are no longer the traditional fields. So we're broadening out, and I'm happy to see that broadening out to environmental history or natural disease and medicine. So there are so many other fields of history that have not really been explored, and I now see the department looking into this. So I'm happy at the state of the department now, that we do have so much more opportunity to do what was not there before. So I look at, I think this will continue. We've taken in a lot of young blood. We've supported them, the young members of the faculty, and we continue to get young blood. I think the other advantage I see now also is that many of our history majors are very serious about the course, the BA history course. When I was an undergraduate, one reason why I could not uh, react very well to my other classmates was they were more politically inclined. They were not really interested in history in that strict sense. And when I graduated, I think apat lang kami na nagtapos eh. Yeah, and yeah, one is in UP Manila, one umalis na sa profession, one is still in the department, si Ted Tantoco, magka-batch kami. But I think, yeah, we were very few. I think we were 8. Now I see there are more. Not everybody goes to history, of course. They go into law. But when you look at 20, 30, ganda. And you have a very active student organization also, which I didn't really have at that time. I tried to, as a junior faculty, help the majors to come up with their own organization. And for a while, we had one which was very active for a while. But then umalis ako, I went to Okinawa, and the one who followed me didn't keep it up afterwards. So that's it for the department. I think it's very good. I like the younger blood in it. I like the different directions that are being taken, the multidisciplinary and the different technological aspects that are being taken. Also, I'm happy that the students are, especially in the undergraduate level, are very serious about this. You know, they're very determined history majors. Now, what about history on the national level? It has its pluses, I think. There are some very, I think the one issue that we have now is that most of the senior members of the history profession have passed. And those who are still alive are not in a position to contribute anymore. These were really, when I was younger, these were all big names, but I took advantage. I didn't take them seriously. I would see them every day. You know, see Dr. Salamanca, and then the others. I got to know almost everyone else in the other universities, Dr. Foronda from LaSalle, I would know, of course, Dr. Ileto, I got to know quite well also. But for a long time, you'd take this, they'll be there forever. Si Dr. Kiason from National Library, NHI, Dr. Tan, we thought that they would never pass away. And then yun pala, they pass away. No? So Dr. Kiason has passed away. Dr. Tan is really the outstanding scholar for Mindanao Muslim studies and the other groups down there. And then they started to pass away. And sabi ko parang nawawala tuloy. No? I guess the fact that it's a very young group that we have now, nawala tuloy yung classic leaders of the profession. No, I naabutan ko pa si Agoncillo, si Constantino, si Zaide. I got to meet Zaide's daughter, and if not them, then their children. So the impact of that older generation was something I felt very strongly, very personally actually. Now it seems like the older generation. I guess one reason why it's like this is because since the department did not recruit young people at an early time, then we didn't have that middle level scholarship. So if you look at it now, ako yung I'm one of the seniors there, but who else is there? Si Dante Ambrosio sana, but namatay na si Dante Ambrosio. And si Ted Tantoco, we are both going to retire in a couple of years. So yun ang naging kulang tuloy because of that. I guess because of that attempt to regulate the new blood coming into the department. So now today we have a lot of young people, but yung middle level and particularly the senior level, parang kulang na. And then when you look at those seniors, even those who are emeritus already, look at Dr. Kamagay, look at Dr. Diokno, you'd see that parang you wish that some of the older people were still around because nandun yung influence nila, no? Influence of Agoncillo, the influence of even De La Costa, from other universities. We don't see them too much, but their works were very important at their time. So parang yun nakikita kong problema. No? We seem to lack this senior historians providing leadership for the younger generation. But anyway, it's a young generation. There's so much to discover. There's so much to look forward to. And given the fact that there's so much that's open to us in terms of the archives and in terms of electronic media, talagang hindi matatapos yung trabaho natin. So it's really a continuous work in progress. And dati, I would hear people complaining, walang balewala yung kasaysayan because it's old-fashioned. I don't hear very much of that now. In fact, most of what I hear now is there's so much relevance in history into the understanding today's world. And I think that's another positive change that we have today. There is interest. Unfortunately, in the K-12 curriculum, di ba, mas mababa yung, mas konti yung historical units. But there is a move among teachers themselves. They're really saying we have to build up historical awareness because it's very important. So I hope that that can be built up and that the K-12 program will bring in more interest because there's really so much more to explore and there's so much that we don't know about.
Okay, sir. Siguro po last question in connection to what you said po last, yung huli po. What
Yeah.
message can you give to history students and teachers in the profession, no,
Mm.
about something to inspire them siguro.
Mm-mm. Yeah. Well, it's always been my belief that if you're interested in it, keep up that interest. Ako, I was virtually alone when I was interviewing these veterans. Even my classmates were saying, ba't ka pupunta sa mga matatandang yun? That was my wealth. And they did not experience that depth of understanding. No, so all of us have our own interests. Don't let anyone disappoint you or discourage you from doing what you want to do. Uh, even when I was going to the Ayala Museum, they said, oh, actually, first love ko, I was still in physics pero when I went to the Ayala Museum the first time. And sabi nila, oh, walang pera sa kasaysayan. There's no history in money. There's no money in history. So you finish your physics na lang, BS Physics. That's your money-making job. Then you finance your historical interest on the sideline. Sabi ko, hindi, I can survive in history. And in fact, yes, you can survive and you can do more than survive in it. There are so many opportunities that are open. So just keep up your interest. Don't let people discourage you. Again, there's so much that's open there that there's no overcrowding in the historical profession. So whether you're teaching or whether you're studying it's something that we really have to continue to encourage. And there's so much more to explore out there.